Nioh 3 is a deep, fast-paced action RPG packed with demanding combat and layered systems that the game doesn't always clearly explain up front. And like previous entries in the series, making the wrong choice early can slow your progress or make the experience much harder than it needs to be. What's up guys, my name is Fervor, welcome back to the channel, and after spending the last 2 weeks going hands-on with the game, oh boy, we got a lot to share. This is our ultimate beginner's guide for Nioh 3. Today, we're going to be covering the core things you need to understand early on, not just what they do, but how they matter in the game, so you know what to prioritize, what to avoid, and how to set yourself up for smoother progression moving forward. One super important thing to keep in mind, and something I really want to stress early, is that exploration is the heart of Nioh 3, because a lot of the most important things you should be doing naturally come from actually exploring the map, and this is a big shift from previous Nioh titles. Before, everything was instance-based, you went in, you did the mission, and you moved on, but with the open world now in place, there's a lot of power that comes directly from engaging with it. You feel that pretty quickly. You're not just exploring for the sake of exploration either, because while you will get passive bonuses like attack, defense, and other base stats that help your character overall, there's also very real, tangible power that can be gained just by being thorough. For example, the Komama are little guides you'll find scattered all across the map. Once you send them back to their correct path, they contribute points that can be used to increase the maximum number of elixirs that you're granted after respawning, and that alone is pretty huge. For long drawn out boss battles, having a better base elixir count means you're walking into a safety net regardless of what's in your storage, which matters a lot early on. On top of that, you also earn passive bonuses that increase how much healing you get, increase the chance of elixirs dropping out in the open world, and a bunch of other buffs that quietly add up over time. The 6 Jizo works pretty similarly, except they specifically apply during the Crucible trials, which we'll talk about in just a second, but the idea is the same. They increase the chance to drop Crucible elixirs, reduce corrosion buildup, and give you more Spirit Force charge, so you can use your Spirit form much more often, which becomes extremely important once you start leaning into tougher encounters. Then you've got Chijoko and Scampuss, and these are just as valuable, if not even more valuable, and they're absolutely a thing you should be engaging with while you're out while exploring. Those give you opportunity to pick up samurai or ninja locks, which can then be spent on progressing your martial arts or ninjutsu, but it goes a step further than that. In some cases, they don't just give you points, they give you access to skills that are locked behind specific conditions, so it's not just here's a point, spend it, it's actually unlocking abilities you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Actively hunting these down open up more tools, more options, and more flexibility in how you play. Now, I'm not going to tell you how to play your game, but what I will say is this: when you come into a new region, it's worth making a conscious effort to get those things done. Relative to the region you're in, knocking this out early will empower characters enough that when you finally reach the stronger bosses in that zone, you're not scrambling or feeling behind, you're actually prepared. Another thing every player should be making a serious effort to interact with is spikes and lesser crucibles. These show up on the map as red flames, and they're one of the most direct ways to power up your spirit guardian. They allow you to level them up, unlock more special abilities, and also unlock their abilities to interact with obstacles in the world, which can lead to powerful encounters or even really strong rewards. On top of that, these locations guarantee at least one soul core, and that alone makes this some of the most valuable activities on the map. You're always going to get something meaningful out of them, and there's always progression there, and that consistency matters. The last big exploration point I want to touch on is the stuff that you don't see on the map, because there's a lot of it. I'm not going to reveal any secret bosses here, but keep in mind that the world is packed with encounters that aren't marked at all. There's a lot of bosses scattered throughout the map that you'll only ever run into if you're actually exploring. Like a lot of the rewards we talked about, these encounters usually drop soul cores, and in many cases they unlock specific skills that you can't get any other way, and on top of dropping a ton of valuable loot. I think the point is pretty obvious here. Nioh 3 fully embraces being an open world RPG, and if you ignore these systems, there's a very real chance you'll end up underpowered and have a much harder time overall. Now, let's talk about XP or Amrita, because this is one of the most important systems to understand when it comes to character progression and dealing with tougher enemies. Amrita is your experience. It lets you level up, give you stat bonuses, increase your weapon damage, improve survivability, and even enable certain yokai abilities as you push further into the game. There's a few meaningful ways to progress your character, and the most straightforward one is just farming enemies. Every enemies give a certain amount of Amrita, which you can use to spend on stats to make yourself stronger, and while how much you get depends on what area you're in, stronger enemies obviously come with more risks. There's always a balance there, because the higher the enemy, the more likely you are to die, and that's something you really feel pretty quickly. Now, another major source of power comes from gear. Gear has multiple affixes that directly affect your character, and both ninja and samurai style need their own dedicated stats. One of the biggest tips I can give here is always keep an eye out for chests on the map, because they tend to drop higher rarity gear. Elite enemies, especially larger yokai, are also more likely to give you better gear, more experience, so they're going to usually be worth engaging. Gear comes in several rarities: common, uncommon, rare, and exotic, and the rarity determines how many affixes can roll. Common gear usually has 2, while exotic can have up to 4, and early on isn't really that deterministic of a way to farm specific gear, mostly just challenging stronger enemies, opening chests, and letting drops come naturally, but later on there are going to be ways to target this a bit more. The third pillar progression is learning ninjutsu and martial arts. The best way to gain points for these is through exploration, picking up blocks like we talked about earlier, opening treasure chests, fighting enemies, and keep an eye out for Scampuss and Chijoko whenever you see them. The fourth pillar is farming yokai, specifically soul cores. We already talked about guaranteed soul cores from the spikes in lesser crucibles. Outside of that, soul cores can drop from yokai at a much lower chance. There are going to be items and passive bonuses that increase this chance, which we'll cover shortly, but it is something you'll naturally be farming as you play. Soul cores do 2 really important things. First, they give you access to yin and yang slots. The yin slot gives you passive stats tied directly to the yokai, which you'll see represented in the stat panel, and once the conditions are met, those bonuses activate based on the yokai you're using. The yin slot is also typically where you equip summon style yokai abilities, and depending on the yokai, that determines how many charges it has. The yang slot, on the other hand, usually forces more utility things like spells, healing, survivability, stealth, and effects like that. How many soul cores you can equip depend on how much you've invested into the magic stat, which naturally makes magic focused builds more effective with the system, which is something super important to keep in mind when you're allocating your stats. One important thing to keep in mind is that you can sacrifice soul cores to strengthen other yokai. With enough time investment, you can farm higher rarity versions of the same yokai. Early on though, this isn't something you really need to worry about. Your focus should be building options so you're prepared for different encounters. The fifth and final pillar of progression is skills. These are passive bonuses that slot into the common, samurai, or ninja categories, and you'll find them throughout the world, usually in treasure chests and looted bodies, but also by defeating enemies. These passives range from simple flat defense bonuses to specific effects like aerial damage, key damage reduction while attacking, and a lot more valuable stats. And there are a ton of these in the game, and finding them is part of the long-term progression. To increase how many passives you can equip, you'll need texts. These are found in treasure chests as well, often alongside the passives themselves, which once again ties inspiration directly into your power. Next, let's touch on a few combat basics that are super important. First, we need to talk about Purify, which is going to be something that a lot of players are going to struggle with. I, even 2 weeks later, still have a bit of a hard time, but I'm still getting a lot better. Anyway, when you're facing off against enemies, specifically yokai, they will sometimes drop these huge black circles on the ground, which will regenerate their ki after they start to attack. When you're in your samurai stance, you can press the shift on the mouse and keyboard. This will essentially cleanse those corrupted areas. You just need to time it correctly. After an attack, you'll see these blue lights on your character. Press shift and this will start the charge of your ki, but also remove this area. The reason why you want to do this is pretty simple. It gives you access to being able to cleanse these areas because they do get sizable buffs from it. Obviously, ki regeneration is a big punish for them. Once their ki goes away, you can do some really strong attacks. They also offer some type of defensive bonuses depending on the monster you're facing off against, and as I said a second ago, it's going to give you the ability to regenerate your ki. This is crucial whenever facing off against bosses. Another super important thing to keep in mind when it comes to combat is taking advantage of swapping. When you press the R key on your mouse and keyboard, this will swap you between the ninja and samurai stance. This is pretty obvious for a lot of you, but this skill is going to be one you need to master early. Whenever an enemy does a red attack, this is important to try to land the swap because this is your burst break. For my seasoned Nioh players, you probably understand this, but this is going to be something super important to do. Later on, your spirit skill will be able to actually function as this, so you can use this in place of swapping to have a little bit more of a consistent way of dealing with this, but regardless, you're going to have to learn the system extremely early. Farming for gear is a natural part of Nioh 3, and this is going to be something a lot of players will be doing for years to come. If you're a fan of awesome boss fights and having the opportunity to jump in and face off against those bosses again, then the battle scroll system comes into play. This is one of the few instances of something like an instant based content in the game, not entirely but to some degree, where the player have the opportunity to replay certain missions, and it has its own rewards. First off, you have access to gaining yokai teardrops that can be exchanged with vendors for powerful item buffs and overall solid benefits. It can also reward gear and also have the ability to farm XP as well as gold. Arguably more importantly, there's a lot of collectibles tied to specific regions and bosses, and this is a great way for you to get a good look at those collectibles missing in that location. This includes ninja texts, samurai texts, and usually a plethora of handbooks and secret skills. On top of that, just being able to face off against the boss once again is rewarding in itself, so if you enjoyed some of the boss fights or you want it to be a little bit cleaner, you can go back and take advantage of the system. Now, I know what you're saying, looking at the level, the gear gets outscaled, but that's not necessarily a problem because fortunately in the game, there's a system that you can use to raise your gear score, so target farming certain balls for certain gear types is actually pretty viable. Next, let's talk about the major hub or the Eternal Rift. This is the major hub for players and houses a plethora of vendors that are extremely core to the progression in Nioh 3. While you won't have all these unlocked at the very beginning of the game, it's still important to know that they exist and they have some pretty extreme value. A moment ago, we talked about the Blacksmith, which goes by the name of the Fox Masked Blacksmith, which features a plethora of functions that the player absolutely needs. First off, we have the ability to forge gear sets and items. As I previously mentioned, exploration is key to finding a lot of these recipes, and this is going to be one of the more deterministic ways of being able to get gear or gear types that you specifically want. You can also craft things like rejuvenation pills, arrows, stone, and many other useful tools that can be helpful during your journey. Naturally, as you come to expect, you can disassemble items as well to build those said tools and armors and gear. But an even deeper mechanic is the soul match and soul extraction system. You can get this by simply following her questline and completing the quest called A Fierce Flame. This questline unlocks this system which lets you essentially take lower rarity as well as lower level gear, extract it and use these materials to bring any form of gear up to that current level, while also giving you the ability to level up benefits like adding +1 to other pieces of gear or current gear that you're using. The benefit here is extremely obvious. In the event that you found, let's say, an item that is extremely powerful, it has 4 really great affixes but is 20 levels under your current one, using this system is going to make it extremely easy for you to keep the gear relevant. This is arguably my favorite system in the game, and a lot of games need to adapt this system. This is going to be good, especially for a farm heavy game like Nioh 3. Another key vendor in this location is a merchant that has very specific gear tied to him, offers some very important things like ninja texts, samurai, and ninja memorandums, and of course the ability to pick up easy to access soul cores. While definitely not the best, this is a great location for you to exchange those yokai teardrops that we talked about not long ago. Not to mention, just as a general vendor, he does give access to common items like hand cannon and rifle ammunition and arrows, for example. On the north side, you have access to a appearance change vendor, which is not necessarily the most important. It's still something extremely valuable for people who like to change their appearance a lot. I know there are a lot of you out there. Finally, the last notable vendor in this location is the hidden tea house. Now immediately, I have not interacted with this mechanic too much, as clan battles are seemingly something designed around multiple players being able to jump in, interact with. And seeing that I got the game 2 weeks early, the masses haven't played it yet, so this isn't something I can interact with, but nonetheless, you're able to join a variety of houses that offer different clan protections, as well as benefits depending on which house you pledge to. This can be something simple like guardian spirit damage, melee damage versus attacking enemies, increased damage to enemies whenever you're at a certain key amount, and a variety of different affixes that you probably come to expect from different pieces of gear. Once again, I haven't been able to interact with this mechanic yet, but it's likely going to be very important in the long run, especially given how much glory you've earned over time by participating in taking down Revenants. Next, and finally, let's talk about the Revenant system and the request assistance mechanic, because these two systems are directly connected. As you progress through the game, you'll start noticing Benevolent Graves and Bloody Graves with Benevolent Graves marked in blue. These represent requests that you can spend Chijoko Cups to summon AI allies. These allies can assist you in combat or simply help you explore the open world much more safely. The number of Chijoko Cups required depends on how powerful the summoned ally is. Before committing, you can check the HUD to see what weapons and what gear the specific NPC is using, which helps you decide whether the cost is worth it. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Nioh 3 is a difficult game. There's absolutely no shame in requesting help. The system exists for that reason, and you should play the game in whatever way that feels right to you. If you need assistance, use it. That said, as you lose fights, your summoned allies will disappear. You'll need to spend additional Chijoko Cups to call them back. You can run out of cups, and the best way to farm them is by engaging with the Bloody Graves, which summon Revenants. Revenants function very similarly to player characters, and in many cases, they're using the actual player's loadouts. You can preview their gear beforehand, and depending on their difficulty, they'll drop a different amount of Chijoko Cups. The takeaway here is pretty simple. Tougher Revenants mean better rewards. If you want more cups, take on harder fights and farm Revenants consistently. But there is an important mechanic tied to Revenants that you absolutely need to understand. As you defeat them, you'll start seeing arrows appearing on the map pointing in a specific direction. The arrows lead to a location where the spirit of the Revenants you've defeated are gathering, and these are two crucial implications here. First, the more spirits you defeat, the stronger Revenant at that location becomes when summoned. The power scales directly with how many you've killed, and if you can beat it, it effectively turns into a massive loot source. The second, and this is where things can get dangerous, this mechanic progresses across the map until you either defeat that powered up Revenant or leave the area. And in my own playthrough, I made the mistake of continuously killing Revenants up to around level 70. By the time I realized what was happening, I unintentionally created a Revenant that was stronger than any boss I fought up to at that point. Now if I could kill it, the loot would probably be absurd, but actually pulling that off is another story. And that's the lesson here. The Revenant system is extremely important and very rewarding, but you don't want to overdo it, otherwise you'll end up like me, stuck in a ridiculously powerful enemy that's incredibly hard to kill. That said, I still think it's pretty cool. And there you have it. That's everything you need to know to get a strong start in Nioh 3, from exploration and progression systems to combat fundamentals, gear farming, and the vendors that actually matter. This guide should help you avoid deadly mistakes that slow you down and put you behind later on. Now, if this guide helped you out, make sure to drop a like as well as subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more Nioh 3 coverage as we get deeper into the game and start breaking down builds, systems, and in-game progression. As always guys, I'll be live streaming here on YouTube as well as Twitch once the game goes live for everyone. So make sure to stop by, hang out with the community if you want to get some questions in or whatever the case. My name is Fervor. Thank you guys for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one very soon.